"Thomas, get away from her. She's nothing but a gold digger." My mother-in-law's voice echoed through the hospital corridor as I sat beside my husband's bed, holding his hand after his surgery. 3 years of marriage, and this was how she still saw me. The girl from the wrong side of the tracks who'd somehow trapped her golden boy. Thomas pulled his hand away from mine, his eyes darting nervously to his mother. In that moment, I saw something in his expression I'd never noticed before. Doubt. And maybe something worse. Agreement. Little did they know, I wasn't after the Reynolds family fortune. I never was. In fact, I owned controlling interest in the company Thomas was so desperate to run. I was the silent partner his father had brought in to save the business years ago. The anonymous investor the Reynolds family had been trying to identify for years. I never told Thomas. I wanted him to love me for me, not my business acumen or my rapidly growing empire. But as I watched him choose his mother's approval and family wealth over our marriage that day, I realized I'd been naive. Love wasn't enough for Thomas Reynolds. He wanted power, status, control, and I was about to show him exactly who controlled everything he'd ever wanted. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My story begins in Boston, not at the hospital, but 2 years earlier at the Reynolds Enterprises annual charity gala. I was 27, not the struggling artist Thomas's family assumed, but the CEO of Morgan Capital, a private equity firm I'd built from the ground up after inheriting my grandfather's small investment company when I was just 22. "Emma, darling, you look absolutely beautiful," Thomas said, his tall frame cutting an imposing figure in his tailored tuxedo as he approached me across the ballroom. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass. Thomas Reynolds was, by all accounts, the perfect catch. Wealthy, handsome, and charming when he wanted to be. Just beautiful enough to be seen with the great Thomas. "Reynolds?" I teased, smoothing down the simple black dress I'd chosen for the evening. Despite my own wealth, I preferred understated elegance to flashy displays. No one could be beautiful enough for that impossible standard, he joked back, kissing my cheek. "But you come devastatingly close." I smiled, playing along with our usual banter, but I couldn't help noticing how his eyes kept darting around the room, checking who was watching us, who might be impressed by his gorgeous fiancée. "Thomas, there you are." Catherine Reynolds, Thomas's mother, approached with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. At 62, she maintained the iron grip of a CEO and the appearance of someone 15 years younger through rigorous exercise, a militant skincare routine, and whatever cosmetic procedures money could buy. "Mother," Thomas said, his posture straightening instinctively. "You remember Emma?" "Of course," she said, her smile never reaching her eyes. "The artist. Still pursuing. That hobby?" "It's her career, Mother," Thomas corrected, though his defense lacked conviction. "It's fine," I said, used to Catherine's dismissals. "My exhibition went well last month. Sold most of my collection." What Catherine didn't know was that my hobby was exactly that, a passion project I pursued because I loved it. My real work happened in boardrooms and investment meetings, but I kept that life separate, not just from the Reynolds family, but from everyone except my closest confidants. "How quaint," Catherine said, her gaze already shifting past me to more important guests. "Thomas, the Whitakers are here. Robert's looking to discuss that merger we talked about." Thomas's eyes lit up with interest. "I'll be right there. Just give me a moment with Emma." Catherine nodded curtly and glided away, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume in her wake. "Sorry about that," Thomas said, not sounding particularly sorry. "Business never stops, you know." "Of course," I replied. "Go network. That's what these events are for." He squeezed my hand gratefully. "You're the best. I won't be long." But he was. I spent most of that evening making small talk with the wives of Thomas's business associates, all while watching him work the room with his father, William Reynolds, the aging patriarch of Reynolds Enterprises, a once formidable manufacturing company that had been secretly struggling for years. "He's being groomed to take over, you know," said a voice beside me. I turned to find Sophia Walker, Thomas's childhood friend, and the current CFO of Reynolds Enterprises. Unlike many at the gala, Sophia knew exactly who I was in the business world. We'd met at Harvard Business School years before I'd ever encountered Thomas, and she'd kept my secret at my request. "William's health is worse than they're letting on," Sophia continued quietly, sipping her champagne. "The company's in trouble too. Thomas has no idea what he's about to inherit." "Is it that bad?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My firm had been monitoring Reynolds Enterprises for potential acquisition before I'd met Thomas. "Worse," Sophia confirmed. "William's been borrowing against future earnings for years. The merger with Whitaker Industries is their last hope." I nodded thoughtfully, watching Thomas laugh with Robert Whitaker across the room, oblivious to the precarious state of his family legacy. "Does Thomas know what he's doing?" I asked. I'd never discussed business with my fiancé, maintaining the illusion that my world consisted only of art studios and galleries. Sophia's hesitation was answer enough. "He understands the basics. He's smart, Emma, but he's been sheltered. William and Catherine have convinced him that the Reynolds name alone opens doors." "And it does," I acknowledged. "Just not all of them." "Not the ones that matter," Sophia agreed. "Not anymore." Later that night, as Thomas and I returned to our penthouse apartment in Back Bay, purchased with my money, though Thomas believed it was primarily funded by his generous contribution, he was buzzing with excitement. "The Whitaker merger is practically a done deal," he announced, loosening his tie as he poured himself a scotch. "Father says I'll be leading the transition team. This is it, Em. My chance to prove myself before I take over." I smiled, kicking off my heels by the door. "That's wonderful, Thomas. You've been working toward this for years." "We've been working toward this," he corrected, crossing the room to pull me into an embrace. "Once I'm CEO, we'll finally give you the wedding you deserve, the life you deserve." His words were sweet, but I couldn't help wondering if he meant the life he thought I should want. A life of luxury as Mrs. Reynolds, rather than the life I'd built for myself. "I love you," I said, because despite my reservations, I did. I'd fallen for Thomas when he'd wandered into my gallery opening 3 years ago, charming and genuinely interested in my work. The Thomas I'd met then wasn't consumed by his family's expectations or corporate ambitions. He was curious, kind, and refreshingly direct. "I love you too," he replied, kissing me softly. "More than anything." The next morning, I woke early as usual. While Thomas slept in, a regular Saturday ritual for him, I made coffee and retreated to my home office, locking the door behind me. This room was the one space Thomas rarely entered, respecting my claim that I needed solitude for my creative process. In reality, it was where I ran Morgan Capital 3 days a week, working remotely while maintaining my cover as a moderately successful artist. The other 2 days, I went to my studio, which was actually my corporate office downtown. "Morning, boss," said Alex Chen, my COO, when I connected to our secure video conference. Though only 33, Alex had been with me since the beginning, one of the few who knew the full extent of my double life. "Morning, Alex. Updates?" I asked, scrolling through overnight reports on my laptop. "The Reynolds-Whitaker merger is moving forward," he confirmed. "But there's a problem. Whitaker's doing his due diligence, and he's going to discover the Reynolds. Financials are worse than disclosed." I frowned. "How much worse?" "They're underwater, Emma. William's been cooking the books. The manufacturing division hasn't been profitable for almost a decade." This news, while concerning, wasn't entirely surprising. I'd suspected William Reynolds of creative accounting for some time. Options? I asked. We could proceed with the original plan, buy controlling interest when the merger falls through and the stock plummets. Reynolds Enterprises has valuable patents and real estate holdings. Stripped down and restructured, it could be extremely profitable. I considered this, thinking of Thomas in the next room, still asleep and dreaming of his future at the helm of his family's company. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. And the alternative? I asked, though I already knew. Alex hesitated. We could save it. Privately approach William with an injection of capital. Become silent partners. It would be less profitable for us, but potentially more stable long-term. And Thomas's position? Preserved, at least in title. Though we'd need strong oversight. Someone we trust embedded in the executive team. Sophia Walker, I said immediately. She's already their CFO and she knows our operation. Alex nodded. She's solid. But Emma, are you sure about this? Saving Reynolds means revealing yourself to William at minimum. It could complicate your personal life. I thought about Thomas, about the man I'd fallen in love with and the future. We'd planned. We approach William. Privately. Non-disclosure agreement. Terms that keep my identity confidential except to him and Sophia. I want controlling interest, but I'm willing to remain a silent partner as long as they follow our restructuring plan. And if William refuses? Alex asked. He won't, I said confidently. He's got too much pride to let Reynolds fail during his lifetime. He'll take our offer. Alex nodded. I'll set up a private meeting through Sophia. William only. No Catherine. No Thomas. Good. And Alex? Let's make sure the terms are fair. I want to save the company, not exploit it. After ending the call, I sat in silence, contemplating the line I was about to cross. I'd kept my business identity separate from my relationship with Thomas for good reason. I wanted to be loved for myself, not my money or influence, but now I'd be secretly saving his family's company, becoming his boss without his knowledge. It was deceptive, even if my intentions were good. Before I could dwell on it further, a knock came at my office door. Emma, you in there? Thomas called. I'm making breakfast. I quickly closed my laptop and unlocked the door. Just finishing. Up some sketches, I said with a smile. Thomas stood there, hair rumpled from sleep, wearing only pajama bottoms. He looked younger somehow, more like the man I'd first met. Pancakes or waffles? He asked, pulling me into a hug. Pancakes, I decided, breathing in his familiar scent and trying to ignore the guilt settling in my stomach. 3 days later, I sat across from William Reynolds in a private dining room at the Harvard Club, dressed in my CEO attire, a tailored navy suit that projected confidence and authority. It was the first time I'd met my future father-in-law as Emma Morgan, rather than Emma Blake, Thomas's artist fiancée. I must say, Ms. Morgan, this meeting is quite unexpected, William said, his expression guarded. At 68, he remained, imposing despite his declining health, his silver hair and patrician features a preview of what Thomas would become in 40 years. I appreciate you agreeing to it, I replied, nodding to Sophia, who sat beside William with a portfolio of documents. And I appreciate your discretion. Sophia speaks highly of you, William acknowledged. Though I confess I'm curious why the notoriously private head of Morgan Capital would take an interest in Reynolds Enterprises. I met his gaze directly. Because I'm engaged to your son. The shock on William's face would have been comical under different circumstances. He turned to Sophia, who nodded confirmation, then back to me. Emma Blake is Emma Morgan? He asked incredulously. But that's complicated, I finished for him. Yes, and I'd like to keep it that way, which is why I've asked for your discretion. William's expression hardened. If this is some kind of corporate espionage, it's not, I interrupted firmly. I was interested in Reynolds Enterprises before I met Thomas. After we became involved, I recused myself from any dealings with your company. But now I understand you're in financial trouble, and the Whitaker merger is likely to fall through once they complete due diligence. William's face flushed. How could you possibly? I have the resources and motivation to help, I continued, ignoring his sputtering. To save the company Thomas loves, but I have conditions. For a moment, William looked ready to storm out. Then, gradually, his businessman's pragmatism overcame his pride. What conditions? He asked tersely. I nodded to Sophia, who opened her portfolio and slid documents across the table. Morgan Capital will provide a capital injection of $350 million in exchange for 51% controlling interest in Reynolds Enterprises, I explained. I will remain a silent partner. My involvement will be known only to you and Sophia, who will represent my interests on the board. William's eyes widened at the figure. And Thomas? Will remain on his current trajectory to become CEO, assuming he demonstrates the necessary competence. But the company will be restructured according to the plan outlined in those documents. Why? William asked, studying me with new eyes. Why the secrecy? Why not just tell Thomas who you really are? I considered my answer carefully. Thomas grew up in your world, William. A world where name and status often matter more than ability or character. I needed to know he loved me for myself, not what I could offer him professionally. William had the grace to look slightly abashed at this assessment of the world he'd created for his son. And now? He asked. You'll continue the charade? For now, I confirmed. Eventually, I'll tell him, when the time is right. William studied the documents before him, his business acumen warring with his pride. Finally, he looked up. I built this company from nothing, he said quietly. It's my legacy to my son. And it still can be, I assured him. This isn't a hostile takeover, William. It's a partnership. One that preserves the Reynolds name and gives Thomas the opportunity to lead. After a long moment, William nodded slowly. I'll need my lawyers to review these terms. Of course, I agreed. But we'll need an answer within the week, before Whitaker completes due diligence. As we concluded the meeting, William paused, fixing me with an evaluating look. Does Thomas know anything about you? The real you? I smiled sadly. He knows the parts that matter, just not this part. I'm not sure I agree, William said, surprising me. The woman who built Morgan Capital from a small family investment firm into one of the most respected private equity companies in Boston? That seems like a part that matters. I didn't have a response for that. As I left the Harvard Club, I wondered if I was making a mistake. Not in saving Reynolds Enterprises. That was a sound business decision regardless of my personal connection. But in continuing to hide such a significant part of myself from the man I planned to marry. What I didn't realize then was that Thomas had secrets of his own. Secrets that would soon test not just our relationship, but everything I thought I knew about the man I loved. William Reynolds agreed to my proposal within 3 days. Pride, it seemed, was no match for financial necessity. The deal was executed with remarkable discretion, a feat in Boston's usually gossipy business community. As planned, Sophia became my eyes and ears within Reynolds Enterprises, while William maintained the illusion of business as usual. I threw myself back into my dual life with renewed determination. By day, I was Emma Blake, the modestly successful artist engaged to Thomas Reynolds. By night and early morning, I was Emma Morgan, restructuring the company my fiancé believed he would someday inherit outright. You're up early again, Thomas commented one morning, finding me already dressed in what he assumed were my painting clothes, actually a casual version of my business attire, easily transformed with the addition of a blazer once I left the free apartment. Inspiration doesn't wait for a reasonable hour, I replied with a smile, kissing him quickly. I'll be at the studio all day. New commission. Thomas nodded, pouring himself coffee. I might be late tonight. The Whitaker deal is taking some unexpected turns. I kept my expression neutral. Oh, problems? Nothing serious, he assured me, though the tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. Just some last-minute negotiations. Father's handling it. What Thomas didn't know was that William had already used my capital injection to quietly buy out Whitaker's interest in the potential merger, restructuring it as a much smaller acquisition of just one of Whitaker's manufacturing divisions. It was the first step in my plan to streamline Reynolds Enterprises, focusing on their most profitable areas while divesting from the failing ones. I'm sure it will all work out, I said, gathering my things. Your father knows what he's doing. Thomas's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Right. As I headed for the door, he called after me. Hey, Em, you don't mind if my mother stops by the apartment this afternoon, do you? She wants to discuss some wedding plans. I paused, hand on the doorknob. Wedding plans? I thought we were waiting until after the merger. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Well, with things moving forward at work, Mother thinks we should start the preliminary arrangements. You know how these society weddings are. Venues book years in advance. Of course, I said, though inwardly I was annoyed. Catherine Reynolds had made no secret of her desire to orchestrate an elaborate society wedding, the kind that would make the social pages and impress her friends. It wasn't at all what I wanted, but I'd avoided the conflict by agreeing with Thomas that we'd wait until his position at Reynolds Enterprises was secured. Just try to be flexible with her? Thomas asked, his tone setting off warning bells in my head. She means well. I bit back a sarcastic response. I'll do my best, I promised instead, and left before I could say something I'd regret. At my downtown office, I found Alex waiting with a stack of reports and a concerned expression. What's wrong? I asked, hanging up my blazer. We may have a problem at Reynolds, he said, following me into my office. The manufacturing division in Michigan is showing some unusual financial activity, large cash withdrawals, unexplained expenses. I frowned, taking the report he offered. Could it be part of William's previous creative accounting? No, this is new. Started about 2 weeks ago, after our deal closed. Alex leaned against my desk. Sophia's looking into it, but she's meeting resistance from the division head. Who's running Michigan again? I asked, scanning the organizational chart. James Peterson. He's been with Reynolds for almost 20 years. Close friend of Williams. I nodded, remembering the name from my due diligence. And he reports directly to Thomas, Alex confirmed. As of last month, part of Williams' preparation for the succession. This complicated things. I'd been careful to maintain separation between my personal and professional involvement with Reynolds Enterprises, but if Thomas was somehow connected to financial irregularities, that separation would become impossible. Have Sophia schedule an audit, I decided. External team, full access. If Peterson pushes back, she has my authority to remove him temporarily during the investigation. And if Thomas interferes? Alex asked carefully. I met his gaze steadily. The same applies. No exceptions. Alex nodded, though his expression remained troubled. There's something else you should know. Catherine Reynolds has been making inquiries about Emma Blake. My stomach tightened. What kind of inquiries? The invasive kind. She's hired a private investigator to look into your background, your finances, your family. This wasn't entirely surprising. Catherine had never approved of me, viewing me as a social climbing artist unworthy of her son. But active investigation was a new level of interference. Let her look, I said with more confidence than I felt. My Blake identity is solid. Trust fund from my grandparents. Modest success in the art world. Clean background. She won't find anything concerning. She's persistent, Alex warned. And she's specifically looking into your family connections, asking about your parents. This was more worrying. My parents, my real parents, had died when I was 16, leaving me in the care of my grandfather. It wasn't something I discussed, much with anyone, including Thomas. Not because it was secret, but because the loss was still painful. In my Emma Blake identity, I'd created a similar but slightly different background. Parents living quietly in Arizona rather than deceased. It was a small deception, one I'd justified as protection against the kind of gold-digger accusations I knew would come from families like the Reynolds. "Keep an eye on her investigation," I instructed Alex. "Let me know if she gets too close, to anything sensitive." "Will do, boss," he said, heading for the door. "Oh, and Sophia mentioned that William wants to meet with you again. Soon." I spent the rest of the morning buried in work, reviewing Reynolds' restructuring plans and handling Morgan Capital's other investments. By noon, I'd almost forgotten about Catherine's impending visit to my apartment, until my phone buzzed with a text from her. "At your apartment." "Where are you?" I checked my watch. She was 2 hours early. Typical Catherine power move. "At my studio. Wasn't expecting you until 3. Key is with doorman. Help yourself to coffee." Her reply came seconds later. "No need for the key. Thomas let me in before heading back to office. Take your time. I'm making myself comfortable." The thought of Catherine Reynolds making herself comfortable in my space sent a chill down my spine. I quickly packed up my things and headed home, changing into more artistic clothes in my car and stopping to deliberately smudge a bit of paint on my hands for authenticity. When I arrived at the apartment, I found Catherine not drinking coffee in the living room as expected, but standing in my home office, examining the locked drawer of my desk with obvious curiosity. "Catherine," I said sharply from the doorway. "Looking for something?" She turned, unembarrassed at being caught snooping. "Emma, darling, I was just admiring your workspace. So creative." Her gaze swept dismissively over my carefully crafted artist's office. The drafting table by the window, the sketches pinned to corkboards, the bookshelf filled with art references and exhibition catalogs. All genuine, all part of my real passion for art, but arranged to conceal the secure computer system and business documents hidden throughout the room. "Thomas mentioned you'd want to discuss wedding plans," I said, not moving from the doorway, making it clear she wasn't welcome to continue exploring. "Yes," she agreed, finally stepping away from my desk. "Shall we sit somewhere more comfortable? Your living room, perhaps?" I led her there, hyper-aware of her evaluating gaze taking in every detail of my home. Though Thomas and I had lived there for nearly a year, Catherine had visited only twice before, making her disdain for the space clear despite, or perhaps because of, its obvious luxury. "I've reserved the Morgan estate for next June," she announced without preamble once we were seated. "It's the only suitable venue for a Reynolds wedding, and they had a cancellation. We'll need to move quickly on the other arrangements." "The Morgan estate?" I echoed, a spike of alarm shooting through me. "In Manchester?" "Of course," Catherine said impatiently. "Where else? It's the premier wedding venue on the North Shore." The irony was almost too much to bear. The Morgan estate was indeed a coveted wedding venue, because it had once been my family's summer home. I'd donated it to a historic preservation trust after my grandfather died, with the condition that it be maintained as both a historic site and an event space. The trust had been only too happy to name it after my family. If we held our wedding there, it was only a matter of time before someone made the connection between Emma Blake and the Morgan family. "I thought we were considering Boston venues," I said carefully. "Thomas mentioned the public garden, or perhaps the MFA. Catherine waved this away. "A garden wedding? Please. The Reynolds family has been celebrating weddings at the Morgan estate for generations. William and I were married there, as were his parents." "I wasn't aware of that connection," I said truthfully. "The Morgans and the Reynolds have a complicated history," Catherine acknowledged with a thin smile. "Business rivals for decades, until the Morgans mostly died out. Now there's just that. Reclusive female CEO, no relation to the estate Morgans, I'm told, and she keeps to herself, probably for the best. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. If she only knew. I'd really prefer something smaller. I tried again. More intimate. Catherine's smile disappeared. Emma, dear, this isn't just any wedding. This is a Reynolds wedding. Thomas is about to become CEO of one of Boston's oldest companies. His marriage needs to reflect that status. I understand that, but do you? She interrupted, her voice sharpening. I sometimes wonder. Thomas comes from a world of responsibilities and expectations, a world you've only glimpsed. As his wife, you'll be expected to uphold certain standards, maintain certain connections. I'm aware of what marrying Thomas means, I said, keeping my voice level with effort. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, you seem remarkably casual about joining one of Boston's premier families. No interest in our traditions, our social obligations. Always disappearing to your studio instead of attending functions with Thomas. One might almost think you're hiding something. Her gaze was calculating now, the polite veneer slipping to reveal the suspicious mind beneath. The only thing I'm hiding, Catherine, is my growing frustration with being treated like an interloper in my own engagement, I replied evenly. I love your son. I want to build a life with him. But that life won't be a carbon copy of yours and William's. Catherine's eyes narrowed. Thomas understands what's expected of him, of his wife. If you can't fulfill that role, perhaps you should reconsider this engagement before anyone gets hurt. Before I could respond, the apartment door opened, and Thomas called out, "Hello? Mother? Emma?" Catherine's demeanor instantly transformed, her smile returning as Thomas entered the living room. "There you are," she said warmly. "Emma and I were just discussing the Morgan estate for the wedding. Isn't it perfect?" Thomas looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. "It's a beautiful venue," he agreed cautiously. "But I thought we were waiting to set a date? June is perfect," Catherine insisted. "And the estate had a rare cancellation. We need to move quickly." "Mother?" Thomas began, a hint of frustration in his voice. "Emma and I will discuss it and let you know." For a moment, I saw a flash of the Thomas I'd fallen in love with. The man who could stand up to his mother, who valued my opinion. But it faded almost immediately as Catherine rose, gathering her designer handbag. "Of course, darling. But don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come along every day." She kissed his cheek, then turned to me with a cool smile. "Think about what I said, Emma. About expectations." After she left, Thomas loosened his tie with a sigh. "That bad, huh? Your mother has strong opinions about our wedding," I said diplomatically. He laughed, pulling me into an embrace. "That's one way to put it. I'm sorry if she was difficult. She means well." "Does she?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice, because it seemed like she was warning me that I don't belong in your world. Thomas pulled back, studying my face with a frown. "That's not true. You know that's not true." "Do I?" I challenged, the frustration of the day finally breaking through. "Every time I'm around your family, I feel like I'm being evaluated and found wanting. Your mother hires private investigators to look into my background." "She what?" Thomas interrupted, looking genuinely shocked. "She's having me investigated, Thomas, digging into my family, my finances. Doesn't that bother you?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I knew meant he was uncomfortable. "I'll talk to her. Make her stop. She's just protective." "That's not protection. That's invasion. And you haven't answered my question. Does it bother you that she's doing this?" Thomas hesitated just a fraction too long. "Of course it bothers me." But I'd seen it. That moment of doubt, of calculation. The same look I'd seen in the hospital in my opening flash forward. "You think she might find something, don't you?" I realized aloud. "Some reason I'm not good enough for you. Emma, that's not fair. Isn't it? You've never once stood up to your parents about us." Not really. You make these little shows of defiance, but when it matters, you always defer to them. To the almighty Reynolds' name. That's not true, he protested, but without conviction. I chose you, didn't I? Despite their objections? Did you? Or did you just delay the inevitable confrontation, assuming I'd eventually transform into the kind of society wife your mother wants? Thomas's expression hardened. That's not fair. I've never asked you to change. You've never had to, I pointed out. Your mother does it for you. We stood in tense silence, the argument hovering unresolved between us. Finally, Thomas's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He checked it with obvious relief. I have to go back. To the office, he said, already moving toward the door. We're finalizing some details on the Whitaker situation. Of course, I said coolly. Work comes first. He paused, looking torn. Emma, we'll finish this conversation later, I promise. I do love you. That hasn't changed. After he left, I sank onto the couch, the weight of my double life suddenly suffocating. I was lying to Thomas about who I really was, while simultaneously resenting him for not fully accepting who I pretended to be. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone rang. Sophia. We have a problem, she said without preamble. Peterson just transferred $2 million from the Michigan division's operating accounts to an offshore company. Thomas approved it. I sat up straighter. What offshore company? Nautilus Ventures, based in the Caymans. I can't trace the ownership yet, but I'm working on it. Put a freeze on all Michigan division accounts, I instructed. Effective immediately. And I want a meeting with William first thing tomorrow. Already scheduled, Sophia confirmed. But Emma, there's something else. Thomas has called an emergency executive meeting for tomorrow afternoon. Word is he's going to announce organizational changes. What kind of changes? I don't know yet. But he's been meeting privately with several board members who were opposed to William's recent strategic decisions. The decisions that were actually my strategic decisions, implemented through William. Keep me posted, I said. And Sophia, be careful. If Thomas is involved in something shady, he might not be working alone. After hanging up, I sat in my silent apartment, the remnants of my argument with Thomas still lingering in the air. Something wasn't adding up. Thomas could be ambitious, even ruthless in business, but outright fraud didn't fit the man I knew, unless I didn't know him as well as I thought. The next morning, as I prepared to meet William, I received a text from Thomas. Sorry about yesterday. Dinner tonight to make it up to you? That Italian place you love, 8 p.m. I stared at the message, wondering what had prompted this olive branch. Was it genuine remorse, or was he trying to keep me distracted while whatever was happening at Reynolds Enterprises played out? Sounds nice, I replied non-committally. If you're not caught up at work. His response came quickly. Nothing more important than us. I promise. As I headed to my secret meeting with his father, I wondered just how many promises in our relationship were about to be broken. William Reynolds looked older than he had just weeks ago. As we sat in the private room at the Boston Harbor Hotel, away from prying eyes of the business community, the once imposing patriarch seemed diminished, shoulders slightly stooped, complexion ashen. I don't know what Thomas is doing, he admitted after I laid out what Sophia had discovered. The Michigan transfers weren't authorized by me. But they were authorized by Thomas, I pressed. $2 million, William, to an offshore account. We can't trace. William pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture I'd seen Thomas make countless times when stressed. My son isn't a thief, Ms. Morgan. I never said he was, I replied carefully. But something irregular is happening in your company, the company I just invested hundreds of millions in. I need answers. I'll speak with him, William promised. After his announcement this afternoon. What announcement? William's expression darkened. Thomas has called a special board meeting. He wouldn't tell me the agenda. That doesn't concern you? I asked, incredulous. Thomas is preparing to take over as CEO, William said defensively. He's entitled to some autonomy in his leadership. Approach. I could see I wasn't going to get more from William. His blind spot where Thomas was concerned was proving to be larger than I'd anticipated. I expect full transparency on this situation by the end of day, I said, gathering my things, or I'll be forced to take more direct action to protect my investment. William's eyes narrowed. Be careful, Ms. Morgan. You may be our majority shareholder, but you're still a silent partner. Don't forget that your involvement is predicated on continued discretion. And don't forget that your company survives because of my investment, I countered. I can be as loud as necessary if my interests are threatened. As I left the hotel, I received a text from Sophia. Board meeting moved up. Starting in 30 minutes. Will update ASAP. Something was definitely wrong. Board meetings weren't rescheduled without significant cause, especially with such short notice. I instructed my driver to take me to Morgan Capital's office, anxiety building with every mile. Alex, I called as I strode through the door. Get me everything we have on Nautilus Ventures in the Caymans, and I want to know who Thomas has been meeting with outside of Reynolds in the past month. Alex fell into step beside me. Already, on it. Preliminary searches show Nautilus was incorporated just 3 weeks ago. Still working on tracing the ownership structure. And the meetings. Thomas has had several dinners with Richard Hayes from Summit Partners. Very hush-hush, no official calendar entries. I stopped abruptly. Summit Partners? The private equity firm? The same. They've been looking to expand their manufacturing portfolio. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Summit Partners was a direct competitor to Morgan Capital, known for aggressive acquisitions and asset stripping. If Thomas was meeting with them, my phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. You need to see this. Sending secure file now. The attachment was a presentation titled Reynolds Enterprises Strategic Restructuring. I opened it with growing dread, Alex reading over my shoulder. He's planning to sell off the most profitable divisions, Alex murmured as we scrolled through the slides, and take on massive debt to acquire Whitaker outright. It's financial suicide, I said, scanning the projections. These growth estimates are pure fantasy. And look at this. He's proposing to move all intellectual property to a new holding company. Let me guess, Alex said grimly. Nautilus Ventures? I nodded, a sick feeling growing. He's stripping the assets before a potential sale, classic preparation for a leveraged buyout. With Summit as the buyer? Alex asked. It looks that way. I continued reading, my shock turning to anger. The board would never approve this. It would destroy the company. Unless he's stacked the board, I finished. How many new directors has William appointed in the past year? Alex checked his tablet. 4, all with connections to Thomas's Harvard Business School network. And how many votes does he need to approve this restructuring? Simple majority. With the new directors and assuming William abstains due to health concerns, he has the votes, I concluded. Damn it. My phone rang. Sophia. Tell me you're watching, she said when I answered. I am. It's insanity. What's happening in the room? Thomas is making his case now. He's convincing. Talking about bold new direction, necessary evolution. The new directors are eating it up. And William? Stunned. He clearly had no idea this was coming. Emma, they're going to vote in 10 minutes. Once this passes, Thomas will have operational control of the restructuring. Over my dead body, I muttered. Sophia, I need you to call for a shareholder intervention. There was a pause on the line. That would mean revealing your position. I know. Do it anyway. Invoke Section 8 of the Charter. Majority shareholder review period. That will only delay the vote by 48 hours, Sophia warned. It's enough time. Just do it. After hanging up, I turned to Alex. Get our legal team ready. We're going to war. Emma, he said cautiously. Are you sure about this? Once your ownership is revealed? I know what it means, I cut him off. For the company. For me personally. For my relationship with Thomas, I didn't add. But the truth was, I was already questioning everything about that relationship. If Thomas was willing to destroy his family's company, the legacy he'd claimed to care so deeply about, what else had been a lie? My phone buzzed again. Another text from Thomas. Meeting running long. Still on for dinner? I stared at the message, anger and betrayal making my hands shake. How could he act so normal, so loving, while simultaneously plotting to undermine everything his family had built? Everything I'd invested in? Can't wait, I replied, the lie bitter on my tongue. So much to talk about. The next few hours passed in a blur of legal consultations and strategy sessions. By 6 o'clock, I had a clear picture of what Thomas was attempting and a plan to stop him. Summit Partners is definitely the buyer, Alex confirmed. They've already drafted a letter of intent. Once Thomas completes the restructuring, they'll swoop in with an offer that the debt-laden Reynolds Enterprises can't refuse. And Thomas would become CEO of the new entity with a significant equity stake, plus a $10 million signing bonus. 10 million pieces of silver, I thought bitterly. The price of betrayal. What about William? Surely he wouldn't approve of selling. To Summit, Alex's expression was grim. The restructuring proposal includes a golden parachute for William. Very generous retirement package, emeritus position on the board, no actual power, but plenty of prestige. And the employees? The factories? Not Summit's concern. Their model is acquisition, asset strip, and resale. Most of the manufacturing operations would likely be shut down or sold off piecemeal. Thousands of jobs lost. Communities devastated. The Reynolds legacy reduced to a line item on Summit's portfolio, and Thomas would profit handsomely from it all. At 7:30, I began preparing. For dinner, though food was the last thing on my mind. I chose a sleek black dress that Thomas had always admired, applied my makeup with precision, and fastened around my neck the diamond pendant he'd given me for our last anniversary. My armor for battle. You don't have to do this, Alex said, watching me from the doorway of my office bathroom. We can handle the legal challenge without the personal confrontation. Yes, I do, I corrected him. I need to see his face when he lies to me. I need to remember that moment when I take everything from him. Alex looked troubled. Emma, I've known you a long time. This isn't you. Don't let anger drive your decisions. This is exactly me, I countered. The me that built Morgan Capital. The me that doesn't allow betrayal to go unanswered. At the restaurant, a small, exclusive Italian place in the North End where Thomas and I had celebrated our engagement, I was shown to a private table in the back. Thomas was already waiting, looking handsome in a charcoal suit, a bottle of champagne chilling beside him. You look beautiful, he said, standing to kiss me. I allowed it, though it took everything in me not to recoil. Special occasion? I asked, nodding to the champagne. Thomas smiled, and I searched his face for signs of the duplicity I now knew lurked beneath his charming exterior. How had I missed it for so long? Very special, he confirmed. I got some good news today. At the board meeting? I asked innocently, taking my seat. If he was surprised by my knowledge, he didn't show it. Yes, actually, the board approved my strategic plan for Reynolds. It's going to transform the company. Transform, I repeated. Interesting choice of words. Thomas frowned slightly. Is something wrong, Em? You seem tense. Just curious about this transformation, I said, unfolding my napkin with deliberate care. What exactly does it entail? It's complex business stuff, he deflected with a wave of his hand. Nothing to worry your pretty head about. In all our years together, Thomas had never been so condescending. It was as if, with his plan in motion, He no longer felt the need to maintain the pretense of seeing me as an equal. "Try me," I challenged. "I might understand more than you think." Thomas sighed, pouring champagne for us both. "All right. I'm restructuring Reynolds to make it more competitive in the modern marketplace, streamlining operations, reallocating resources to more profitable sectors. And selling off assets to Nautilus Ventures?" I added casually. His champagne glass paused halfway to his lips. "How do you know about Nautilus?" "I know a lot of things, Thomas. Like your meetings with Richard Hayes at Summit Partners, the leveraged buyout you're planning, the way you're gutting your family's company for a payday." Thomas set down his glass, his expression hardening. "You've been spying on me?" "No," I replied evenly. "I've been protecting my investment." "What investment?" he scoffed. "Your little art gallery? What does that have to do with Reynolds Enterprises?" It was time. I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not talking about the gallery, Thomas. I'm talking about the $350 million I invested in Reynolds Enterprises. As majority shareholder." The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" "Emma Blake isn't my only identity," I explained, feeling a strange calm descend as years of deception finally ended. "I'm also Emma Morgan, CEO of Morgan Capital, the silent partner who saved your family's company when it was on the brink of collapse." Thomas stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. That's impossible. My father would have told me." "Your father kept my identity confidential at my request. A request I'm now regretting, given your plans to sell out to Summit." "You're lying," Thomas said, but doubt had crept into his voice. "This is some kind of sick joke. I assure you it's not. Check your phone. By now, Sophia Walker will have invoked my shareholder rights to block your board vote for 48 hours at least." As if on cue, Thomas's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression confirming what I'd said. "You can't do this," he said, anger replacing shock. "I've spent months planning this deal. Summit is offering a chance to destroy everything your family built," I interrupted. "Along with a nice payday for yourself. 10 million, isn't it? Plus equity?" Thomas's jaw clenched. "It's a good deal for everyone. The Reynolds name stays on the company. My father gets a comfortable retirement. The shareholders get a premium on their investment. And the 3,000 employees across 6 manufacturing facilities, what do they get? Business evolves, Emma. Some jobs become obsolete." I barely recognized the cold-eyed man sitting across from me. Where was the Thomas who had talked passionately about his responsibility to the communities where Reynolds operated? The man who had proudly shown me around the Michigan factory, introducing me to workers whose families had been with the company for generations? "So this is who you really are," I said quietly. "All that talk about legacy and responsibility, it was just talk." "Don't you dare judge me," Thomas snapped. "You've been lying to me our entire relationship, pretending to be some struggling artist while secretly controlling my family's company." "I never wanted control," I corrected him. "I wanted partnership. With the company and with you. I kept my identity separate because I needed to know you loved me for me, not my money or influence." "Well, that worked out great, didn't it?" Thomas said bitterly. "We've both been living lies." He wasn't wrong. We sat in silence for a moment. The ruins of our relationship spread between us like shattered glass. "What happens now?" Thomas finally asked. "Now I protect my investment," I replied, "starting with removing you from any position of authority at Reynolds Enterprises." Thomas laughed harshly. "You can't do that? I'm a Reynolds. The company bears my name." "Names can be changed," I said coldly, "and the board serves at the pleasure of the majority shareholder. My father won't stand for this." "Your father already knows what you were planning. He's devastated, Thomas, not just by the business betrayal, but by what it reveals about your character." Thomas flinched, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the man I thought I'd loved, someone who still cared about his father's opinion, who might feel shame for his actions. But it vanished quickly, replaced by calculation. You know, this could work to both our advantages, Emma. With your capital and my connections at Summit, we could structure a deal that benefits everyone. Are you seriously trying to negotiate? I asked, incredulous. After what you've done? Being practical, he countered. You may be the majority shareholder, but I'm still a Reynolds. I have influence, relationships you'll need if you want to run the company effectively. I don't need your help to run anything, I said, rising from my seat. And this conversation is over. Thomas grabbed my wrist as I turned to leave. Don't walk away from me, Emma. You'll regret it. I stared pointedly at his hand until he released me. The only thing I regret is ever believing you were worthy of my love. As I walked out of the restaurant, my phone rang. Catherine Reynolds. You. Conniving little snake, she hissed when I answered. I knew there was something wrong about you from the start. Good evening to you too, Catherine, I replied, sliding into the back of my waiting car. William just told me everything, she continued, rage evident in every syllable. How dare you infiltrate our family like this? Spy on us from within? I didn't infiltrate anything. I corrected her. I met and fell in love with your son before I ever invested in Reynolds Enterprises. The fact that you can't separate business from personal matters is your problem, not mine. You've destroyed my son's future, she accused. The Summit deal would have secured his position. The Summit deal would have destroyed thousands of jobs and gutted a century-old company, I countered. If that's the future you want for Thomas, you're an even worse mother than I thought, Catherine gasped. How dare you? No, how dare you? I interrupted, my patience finally snapping. You raised your son to believe that money and status matter more than integrity, that it's acceptable to betray family, employees, and community for personal gain. If anyone destroyed Thomas's future, Catherine, it was you. I ended the call before she could respond, leaning back against the leather seat as my driver navigated through Boston's narrow streets. Where to, Ms. Morgan? He asked. I realized I didn't want to go back to the apartment I shared with Thomas. Not tonight. Maybe not ever again. The Four Seasons, I decided. And Richard? I'll need the penthouse for at least a week. Yes, ma'am. And should I have security meet us there? I considered this. Thomas had never been violent, but I'd also never thought him capable of the corporate treachery he'd planned. Better safe than sorry. Yes, and contact Mr. Chen. Tell him I need a team to collect my personal items from the Back Bay apartment tomorrow morning. As the car pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of Thomas rushing out of the restaurant, looking around frantically. Our eyes met through the car window for one brief moment. The mixture of anger, confusion, and calculation in his expression told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Morgan, Richard Hayes from Summit Partners. We should talk. So Thomas had already reached out to his co-conspirators. I wasn't surprised, just disappointed, at how quickly he'd moved from romantic partner to business adversary. Nothing to discuss, Mr. Hayes, I replied. Reynolds Enterprises is not for sale. His response came quickly. Everything has a price. Shall we discuss yours over breakfast tomorrow? The audacity was almost admirable. My schedule is full, indefinitely, and Summit Partners has just been blacklisted from any future dealings with Morgan Capital or its subsidiaries. Good evening. I blocked the number, then texted Alex. Summit will make another approach. Prepare countermeasures. As my car pulled up to the Four Seasons, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the battle ahead. In the span of a few hours, I'd lost my fiancé, exposed my secret identity, and made powerful enemies. But I'd also reclaimed something I hadn't realized I'd been slowly surrendering throughout my relationship with Thomas. My power. My autonomy. My true self. As the doorman greeted me by name, my real name, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Welcome, Ms. Morgan. he said with a respectful nod. "It's good to have you back." "It's good to be back," I replied, and for the first time that day, I meant it. The penthouse suite at the Four Seasons should have felt luxurious, a sanctuary high above the city with panoramic views of Boston Harbor. Instead, as dawn broke, the morning after my confrontation with Thomas, it felt empty, hollow, like I was floating untethered in a space too large for one person. I hadn't slept. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas's face, first shocked, then calculating, as I revealed my true identity. The betrayal in his eyes mirroring my own feelings precisely. "Ms. Morgan?" A soft knock accompanied the voice. "Your breakfast is here, and Mr. Chen is on his way up." "Thank you, Marie," I called to the hotel's guest relations manager. "You can send him in when he arrives." I'd barely touched the coffee when Alex entered, carrying his customary tablet and a concerned expression. "You look terrible," he observed, bluntly. "Tell me something I don't know," I replied, gesturing for him to sit. "Thomas has been trying to reach William all night. Called him 17 times. That qualified as something I didn't know. William's not taking his calls." Alex shook his head. "Apparently not. And Thomas showed up at his parents' home in Brookline at 2 a.m. Security turned him away on William's instructions. So the rift between father and son was more serious than I'd anticipated. That complicated things, both professionally and personally." "What about the board?" I asked. "Divided. The new directors Thomas brought in are standing firm, but several longtime members have expressed concerns about the summit deal now that it's been exposed. They're requesting a special meeting with you." I nodded, sipping my coffee. "Said it. Up for tomorrow. What about the Michigan division?" "All accounts frozen as ordered," Alex confirmed. "Peterson is threatening legal action, claiming operational disruption. Let him. We'll counter with fraud allegations if necessary." I rubbed my temples where a headache was building. "What about my personal situation?" "Security team is at your apartment now, gathering your things. Thomas is there, but he's being cooperative." The way Alex hesitated made me suspicious. "Define cooperative." "He's not interfering, but he's insisting on speaking with you. Says there are things you don't understand about the summit deal." I laughed bitterly. "I understand enough." "There's something else," Alex said hesitantly. "The press got wind of the situation. Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, even local. Boston outlets. They're all running stories about the Reynolds Enterprises upheaval." "And me?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "Do they know about my involvement?" "Not yet. But it's only a matter of time. Your identity as the mystery investor will eventually come out, especially if this moves to litigation. Which it almost certainly would. Thomas wasn't the type to surrender without a fight, especially with tens of millions of dollars at stake. Draft. A press statement, I decided. Something factual but minimal. Confirm Morgan Capital's majority ownership of Reynolds Enterprises. Express confidence in the company's future under current leadership. No mention of my personal relationship with Thomas? Alex nodded, making notes. "What about your gallery opening tonight?" "It's been on the calendar for months. I'd completely forgotten." "Cancel it." "Emma," Alex said gently. "I know you're hurting, but maybe staying busy would help. Your art has always been your outlet." "My art," I echoed hollowly. "Another lie in a life full of them." "Your art was never a lie," Alex countered firmly. "It's genuinely who you are, one of the few authentic parts of your life outside of work." He was right, but the thought of standing in a gallery, making small talk with Boston's elite while my personal and professional lives imploded, seemed unbearable. "Postpone then," I conceded. "Cite a family emergency." After Alex left, I forced myself to shower and dress, though the simple acts felt monumental. I chose a severe black pantsuit, armor for the battlefield my life had become. My phone had been buzzing consistently, most calls from Thomas or unknown numbers that were likely journalists. I ignored them all until William Reynolds's name appeared on the screen. "William?" I answered, my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. "Ms. Morgan," he replied formally. "I believe we need to meet." "I agree." "My office at 2? "No," he said firmly. "Somewhere private, the Reynolds summer home in Manchester, 4 o'clock. It was an unusual request. The summer home was over an hour from Boston, isolated on the rocky coastline north of the city. "Why there?" I asked cautiously. "Because what I have to discuss shouldn't be overheard by anyone, and because some things need to be said face to face." His tone sent a chill through me. "I'll be there." After hanging up, I immediately called Alex back. "William wants to meet at the Reynolds summer house, alone." "That sounds like a trap," Alex said bluntly. "It might be," I agreed. "But I need to hear what he has to say." "Then you're not going alone. I'll send a security team ahead to check the property, and I'm coming with you." I knew better than to argue with Alex when he used that tone. "Fine, but you wait in the car." 10 feet away at all times," he countered. "Final offer." The drive to Manchester by the Sea was tense and silent. Alex periodically checked in with the security team, who reported that the property appeared secure. William had arrived alone an hour earlier. The Reynolds summer home was a sprawling colonial revival, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. Unlike the Morgan estate several miles down the coast, which had been maintained in its historic grandeur, the Reynolds property had a slightly faded elegance, as if it had been neglected in recent years. William was waiting on the wide front porch, looking frail in the harsh afternoon light. "You brought security," he observed as we approached, eyeing Alex and the 2 other men who had stationed themselves discreetly around the property. "A necessary precaution," I replied. "These are complicated times." William nodded, then gestured toward the door. "Come inside. Alex can wait here." Alex started to protest, but I silenced him with a look. 10 minutes, I said. "Then you check on me." Inside, the house was cooler than the spring air outside, with the musty smell of a place opened up after a long winter. William led me to a study lined with bookshelves, maritime paintings, and family photographs. I couldn't help noticing how prominently Thomas featured in these images, sailing as a boy, graduating from Harvard, standing proudly in front of the main Reynolds factory. "Bourbon?" William offered, already pouring himself a generous glass. "No, thank you." He shrugged and took a long swallow, then settled heavily into a leather chair. "I've spent 50 years building Reynolds Enterprises," he said without preamble. "Took what my father created and expanded it tenfold, all for Thomas." I remained silent, sensing he had a prepared speech. "I knew you weren't just an artist," he continued. "From the moment Thomas introduced you, there was a sharpness in your eyes, an awareness of the game being played around you. I had you investigated, of course. This surprised me." "You knew who I was before our meeting at the Harvard Club?" William smiled thinly. "I suspected. Couldn't confirm it until you approached me with your offer." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I was curious," he admitted, "about your motives. About what kind of woman would hide her success from the man she claimed to love." His words stung precisely because they hit at my own doubts. "I wanted Thomas to love me for myself," I said, the explanation sounding hollow even to my own ears. "And I wanted a son who valued integrity over profit," William countered. "It seems we were both disappointed." "What do you want, William?" I asked, tiring of the verbal sparring. "You didn't bring me all the way out here to reminisce." He took another sip of bourbon, his hand trembling slightly. "I'm dying, Ms. Morgan. Cancer. 6 months, maybe less." The blunt announcement took me aback. "I'm sorry," I said automatically. "Does Thomas know?" "No," William replied. "I was waiting until he was firmly established as CEO before telling him. I wanted to see him succeed on his own merits, to know The company would be in good hands. The irony was painful. Instead, you discovered he was planning to sell it out from under you. William's jaw tightened. Yes, to the vultures at Summit Partners, no less. They've been circling Reynolds for years, waiting for a weakness. William, I'm not finished, he interrupted. Thomas betrayed more than just me. He betrayed everything the Reynolds name stands for. 3 generations of building something. That matters. Something that provides good jobs, supports communities. The vehemence in his voice surprised me. William had always seemed like a traditional businessman, profit-focused, pragmatic. This passion for the social impact of his company was unexpected. So what happens now? I asked quietly. William set down his glass and leaned forward. I want Thomas removed from the company. Completely. No golden parachute, no emeritus position, no Reynolds connection whatsoever. That's extreme, I said cautiously. He's still your son. And this is still my legacy, William countered. I won't have it tainted by his greed. I studied William's face, noting the signs of strain and illness I'd overlooked before. What are you proposing exactly? A complete restructuring, he said firmly. New board, new management team, a clear succession plan that excludes Thomas. And who would lead this restructured company? William held my gaze steadily. You would, Ms. Morgan, as the public face of Reynolds Morgan Enterprises. The suggestion took my breath away. William, that would mean exposing my involvement completely. My entire identity would become public. Yes, he agreed. No more hiding in the shadows. No more Emma Blake. Just Emma Morgan, CEO and majority shareholder. The prospect was both terrifying and oddly liberating. For years, I'd maintained my dual identities, separated my worlds meticulously. The thought of integrating them, of being fully myself in all aspects of my life. Why me? I asked. You barely know me. I know enough, William replied. I know you built Morgan Capital from a modest inheritance into a powerhouse. I know you value sustainable growth over quick profits. And I know you were willing to remain in the background to save Reynolds, rather than engaging in a hostile takeover when we were vulnerable. He rose slowly, moving to a desk where he retrieved a folder. This is my revised will and a letter to the board indicating my wishes for succession. I've already signed everything. All it needs is your agreement. I took the folder but didn't open it. This is a lot to process, William. You have 48 hours, he said, before Thomas's board vote is automatically rescheduled. I need your decision by then. And if I decline? William's expression hardened. Then I'll take my chances with a public fight against my son. But Reynolds Enterprises likely won't survive that battle intact. As I drove back to Boston, the folder sat heavy on my lap, William's proposal churning in my mind. Alex wisely remained, silent, sensing my need to process. My phone rang. Sophia. Please tell me you have good news, I said by way of greeting. Define good, she replied grimly. Thomas just called an emergency executive meeting for tomorrow morning. He's telling people it's to address misconceptions about the summit. Deal? But I'm hearing he plans to challenge your shareholder authority. On what grounds? I asked, alarmed. He's claiming William was not mentally competent when he approved your investment, that the deal should be invalidated. It was a desperate move, but potentially devastating. If Thomas could create enough doubt about William's competence, he might convince a court to freeze the company's operations pending an investigation. There's more, Sophia continued. Catherine Reynolds is reaching out to every board member, personally. She's persuasive. Having experienced Catherine's intensity firsthand, I could imagine how persuasive she might be, especially with board members who had long-standing social connections to the Reynolds family. Keep me posted on any developments, I instructed. And Sophia, be careful. This is turning uglier than I anticipated. When we reached the Four Seasons, the lobby was crawling with reporters. Someone had leaked my location. Back entrance, I instructed the driver, who nodded and swiftly changed course. Your security team removed your personal items from the apartment, Alex informed me. Everything's been transferred to the penthouse. All of it? I asked, thinking of my art supplies, my journals, the small mementos I'd collected throughout my relationship with Thomas. Everything important, Alex confirmed. Though Thomas insisted on keeping some of your artwork, the team didn't force the issue, given the fragility of the pieces. My stomach twisted. Was Thomas holding my artwork hostage, or did he genuinely want to keep those pieces of me? And which possibility was more painful to contemplate? Ms. Morgan, the hotel's security chief, greeted us at the service entrance. We've secured the elevator to your floor. No press has made it past the lobby. I thanked him mechanically, feeling an overwhelming wave of exhaustion as we rode up to the penthouse. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation with Thomas and the meeting with William was finally wearing off, leaving raw emotion in its wake. In the penthouse, my belongings had been arranged with careful consideration. Clothes hung in the closet, toiletries organized in the bathroom, even my favorite throw blanket draped over the couch. But the space still felt temporary, impersonal. A hotel room, not a home. There's food in the fridge, Alex said, hovering uncertainly. And I've cleared your schedule for the rest of the day. Try to get some rest. I nodded, knowing rest would be impossible. What's the press saying? Alex hesitated. You sure you want to know right now? I need to know what we're dealing with, he sighed, pulling up his tablet. Major outlets are still focused on the business angle. Turmoil at Reynolds Enterprises, mysterious investor intervention. But the gossip sites? He trailed off. Show. Me, I insisted. Alex reluctantly turned the tablet toward me. The headline from a popular gossip blog screamed, Reynolds' heir's artist fiancé revealed as secret billionaire. Was it all a trap? Beneath it was a photo of Thomas and me at a charity gala months earlier, looking happy and in love, alongside a candid shot of me entering Morgan Capital's offices, dressed in my CEO attire. The contrast was stark and deliberately damning. Scrolled through more headlines, each worse than the last. Gold digger or corporate shark. The double life of Emma Morgan. Reynolds' family sources. She infiltrated our family to steal our company. Jilted billionaire takes revenge on cheating fiancé by seizing family business. That last one stopped me cold. Cheating fiancé? Alex shifted uncomfortably. There are rumors about Thomas and someone at Summit Partners, a woman named Vanessa Keller, executive VP of acquisitions. A strange, hollow laugh escaped me. Of course there are. The perfect symmetry. We were both living double lives. Emma, it's just gossip, Alex said gently. No confirmation. But something clicked into place. Thomas's late nights, his sudden business trips, the increasing emotional distance between us in recent months. I'd attributed it to stress, to his preparation for taking over as CEO. Fool that I was. Get confirmation, I said, my voice hardening. If Thomas was having an affair with someone at Summit while negotiating this deal, it's relevant to our legal position. Alex nodded. I'll have our investigators look into it. In the meantime, you should— Don't tell me to rest, I snapped. I can't rest. I can't think. I can't even breathe properly right now. The admission of vulnerability surprised us both. Alex had seen me through business crises, market crashes, even the death of my grandfather. But he'd never seen me like this. Unraveling, emotional, lost. Then don't rest, he said after a moment. Paint. What? Your art supplies are in the second bedroom. I made sure of it. If you can't sleep and you can't work, then paint. Do the one thing that's always been truly yours. It was sound advice. Art had been my sanctuary since childhood, the one place where I could be fully present, fully authentic. Not Emma Blake the artist or Emma Morgan the CEO, just Emma, expressing what couldn't be contained in balance sheets or business strategies. After Alex left, I found myself standing in the makeshift studio he'd arranged in the penthouse's second bedroom. My easel had been set up by the window, canvas already stretched, paints and brushes laid out neatly. I stared at the blank canvas for a long time, paralyzed by the magnitude of emotion seeking expression. Betrayal, rage, grief, shame. How could I possibly capture the complexity of what I was feeling? And yet, as I finally picked up a brush, I found myself painting not an abstract representation of my emotional state, but a portrait. Thomas, as I'd first seen him, curious, open, seemingly genuine as he studied one of my early works at a small gallery showing. Had it all been a lie? His interest in my art, his support of my career, his love for me? Or had there been truth there initially, before ambition and greed corrupted it? I painted through the night, losing myself in the work, barely noticing as dawn broke over Boston Harbor. The finished portrait showed Thomas in dual aspects, the man I thought I knew and the stranger who had emerged, divided by a jagged line down the center of the canvas. Two faces of the same person. Just as I had been two people throughout our relationship. As I cleaned my brushes, emotionally spent but oddly calm, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Thomas just arrived at Reynolds HQ with lawyers. Lots of them. And Catherine is with him. It's happening. The battle for Reynolds Enterprises and for my future was officially beginning. And despite the sleepless night, despite the emotional devastation of the past 48 hours, I felt a strange clarity emerging from the chaos. Thomas had chosen wealth over love, status over integrity, ambition over loyalty. Now he would learn exactly what those choices would cost him. Ms. Morgan, the board members are waiting in conference room A. I nodded to Sophia's assistant, taking a final moment to collect myself before facing the Reynolds Enterprises board of directors. After a nearly sleepless night, I'd made my decision. I would accept William's proposal and step into the public. Role as CEO of the newly structured Reynolds Morgan Enterprises. No more hiding, no more dual identities. The faces that turned toward me as I entered the conference room ranged from openly hostile to cautiously curious. The division was clear. Thomas's recently appointed allies on one side, the older, long-serving directors on the other. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, I began, taking the seat at the head of the table that would traditionally have been occupied by William or Thomas. I understand you have questions about recent events. Questions? Harold Winters, one of Thomas's Harvard classmates and newest board appointees, scoffed. Ms. Morgan, you've effectively staged a hostile takeover of a family company through what appears to be highly questionable means. A hostile takeover involves acquiring a company against the wishes of its leadership, I corrected him calmly. My investment in Reynolds Enterprises was solicited and approved by William Reynolds himself, with full legal documentation that has been provided to all of you. Documentation signed when William was already ill, countered Patricia Lawson, another of Thomas's allies. His judgment was impaired. William Reynolds's medical condition has no bearing on his legal competence at the time of our agreement, I replied, and I've brought someone who can speak to that directly. On cue, the conference room door opened, and William entered. He looked frailer than he had just days ago at the summer house, but his expression was resolute as he took the seat beside me. I believe some of you are questioning my mental capacity, he said, his voice steady despite his obvious physical weakness. Let me assure you that I was, and am, fully cognizant of my decisions regarding Ms. Morgan's investment in Reynolds Enterprises. The room fell silent, the directors who had aligned with Thomas looking distinctly uncomfortable. William hadn't been seen at the office in weeks, and his appearance now, clearly ill but mentally sharp, undercut Thomas's claims about his father's competence. "William," began Margaret Chen, one of the longest-serving board members, "no one questions your dedication to this company. But these changes, bringing in an outside investor, restructuring leadership, they're unprecedented in Reynolds history." "Unprecedented times call for unprecedented measures, Margaret," William replied. Reynolds Enterprises was facing financial collapse. Ms. Morgan's investment saved us from bankruptcy. This was news to several board members, judging by their expressions. Thomas had apparently kept the company's true financial situation from them when soliciting their support for his plans. "That's an exaggeration," protested Winters. "The company had challenges, but bankruptcy?" Thomas presented a detailed growth strategy just last week. "A strategy predicated on a sale to Summit Partners that would have dismantled our core operations," I pointed out. "Hardly a plan for sustainable growth." Before Winters could respond, the conference room door burst open, and Thomas strode in, followed closely by Catherine and a man I recognized as Martin Gray, one of Boston's most aggressive corporate attorneys. "I see you've started without me," Thomas said coldly, his gaze fixed on me before shifting to his father. "Dad, you shouldn't be here. You need to be resting." "What I need, Thomas, is to undo the damage you've done to this company," William replied, his voice hardening. Catherine moved to William's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Will, you're not thinking clearly. Let us take you home." William shrugged off her touch. "I'm exactly where I need to be, Catherine." The tension in the room was palpable as Thomas took a seat across from me, Gray standing behind him like a sentinel. "This meeting is irregular," Gray announced. "As counsel for Reynolds Enterprises, I must advise the board that any decisions made today may be subject to legal challenge." "You're not counsel for Reynolds Enterprises, Mr. Gray," I corrected him. "You're Thomas's personal attorney. The company's legal representation is handled by Stevens and Marsh, who have been fully briefed on the situation." Gray's eyes narrowed. "Nevertheless, perhaps," I interrupted, "we should clarify exactly what this meeting is about. I've called you all here to discuss the future of Reynolds Enterprises in light of recent events, specifically Thomas's unauthorized attempt to restructure the company for sale to Summit Partners." "That restructuring plan was approved by this board," Thomas countered. "Under false pretenses," William said sharply. "You misrepresented the purpose and consequences of your proposal." The older board members shifted uncomfortably, several nodding in agreement with William. "Furthermore," I continued, "new information has come to light regarding potential conflicts of interest in the proposed Summit Partners deal." Thomas's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "What information?" I opened a folder in front of me, drawing out several photographs. "These were taken over the past 3 months. They show you, Thomas, meeting privately with Vanessa Keller, Executive VP of Acquisitions at Summit Partners." I slid the photos across the table. They were innocuous on their own, Thomas and a striking brunette entering a hotel, having dinner, at an out-of-the-way restaurant, walking closely together in a park. But the pattern they established was unmistakable. "Business meetings," Thomas said dismissively, though a flush had crept up his neck. "Our investigators interviewed the hotel staff," I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "You and Ms. Keller shared a room on at least 6 occasions while negotiations with Summit were underway. A clear violation of corporate ethics and possibly securities law, given Summit's status as a potential acquirer of Reynolds." Catherine's face had gone white. Not with shock, I realized as I studied her, but with fury, directed not at Thomas, but at me. "How dare you?" she hissed. "Spying on my son? Invading his privacy? Dragging his personal life into a business matter when his personal life directly impacts a multi-million-dollar business transaction? It becomes relevant," I replied evenly. "Especially when he's willing to sacrifice 3,000 jobs and a century of corporate legacy for a personal payday, and Apparently, a romantic relationship. Thomas stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. This is beneath contempt, Emma. Using private investigators to follow me. Creating this fiction about my relationship with a business associate? Fiction, I echoed, pulling out one final photograph. Thomas and Vanessa locked in an unmistakably intimate embrace on a balcony overlooking Boston Harbor. Is this fictional, Thomas? This was taken at the Summit Partners corporate retreat last month. The retreat you told me was a solo fishing trip to Maine. The blood drained from Thomas's face as the photograph circulated among the board members. Several of the older directors looked physically pained by the evidence of his deception. Thomas, William said quietly, devastation evident in his voice. Is this true? Were you involved with this woman while negotiating the sale of our company? For a moment, I almost felt sorry for Thomas. The weight of his father's disappointment seemed to physically diminish him. But then he straightened, his expression hardening into something cold and unfamiliar. My personal relationships are irrelevant to the business at hand, he said stiffly. The summit offer represents the best path forward for Reynolds Enterprises. The best path for whom? William asked, his voice barely above a whisper. For our employees? For the communities we serve? Or for you, Thomas? Before Thomas could respond, Margaret Chen cleared her throat. I think I've heard enough. I move that we reconsider the restructuring vote from last week, given this new information about potential conflicts of interest. I second the motion, added Robert Daniels, another long-serving director. And I further move that we suspend Thomas Reynolds from his operational duties pending a full investigation. The color rushed back to Thomas's face in a flush of anger. You can't do that. I'm a Reynolds. This company bears my name. Actually, I interjected quietly, they can, with the majority shareholders' support, which they have. This isn't over, Thomas warned, gathering his things as the vote proceeded, unanimously against him, even his recent appointees unwilling to stand beside him in light of the evidence presented. You'll regret this, Emma. All of you will. As he stormed out, Catherine lingering only long enough to shoot me a venomous glare before following her son, an unexpected wave of sadness washed over me. This victory felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge that I'd contributed to my own heartbreak through years of deception. The remainder of the meeting passed in a blur of procedural details. The board voted to approve William's proposed restructuring, with me stepping in as interim CEO while a search committee formed to identify a permanent executive team. Though William had suggested I take the role permanently, I'd decided against. Reynolds Morgan Enterprises needed leadership untainted by the personal drama that now enveloped its major stakeholders. As the directors filed out, William remained seated, looking exhausted but satisfied. You did well, he said when we were, alone. Better than I expected. The evidence regarding Thomas and Vanessa Keller was compelling, I acknowledged. William's gaze sharpened. Almost too compelling. Those photographs. They weren't taken by corporate investigators, were they? I met his eyes steadily. Does it matter? The relationship was real. It matters to me, William insisted. I need to know if you set my son up. The accusation stung, though I understood its source. A father's desperate hope that his son had been somehow entrapped rather than willingly corrupt. I did not set Thomas up, I said firmly. The initial investigation into the Michigan Division's irregular transfers led us to Summit Partners. The connection to Vanessa Keller emerged naturally from there. William studied me for a long moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied. I believe you, though I'm not sure it makes things any better. My son was willing to betray his family, his employees, and his fiancée, all for money and a woman he barely knows. I reached out impulsively, covering his weathered hand with mine. I'm sorry, William. Truly. He gave me a tired smile. You have nothing to apologize for, Emma. If anything, I owe you an apology. I raised him to value the wrong things: status, power, the Reynolds name above all else. You can't take all the blame, I said gently. Thomas made his own choices. As did you, William pointed out. Living a double life couldn't have been easy. I withdrew my hand, uncomfortable with his perception. It was necessary, at the time. Was it? He challenged mildly. Or was it easier than being vulnerable, than risking rejection if Thomas knew the real you? The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Had my elaborate deception been about protecting myself rather than testing Thomas's love? Had I created a self-fulfilling prophecy by assuming he would value me differently if he knew my wealth and power? Before I could formulate a response, William rose shakily to his feet. I should go. This has been more taxing than I anticipated. Let me call you a car, I offered, concerned by his pallor. Already arranged, he assured me. But Emma, this situation with Thomas, it's not over. He won't go quietly. I know, I acknowledged. I'm prepared. William's expression was grave. Don't underestimate him, or Catherine. They can be ruthless when cornered. After William departed, I remained in the conference room, staring out at the Boston skyline as the afternoon. Sun cast long shadows across the financial district. My phone buzzed incessantly, calls from reporters probably, along with concerned friends who had seen the news about my unmasking as Emma Morgan. One text caught my attention, from an unknown number. We need to talk. About Summit. About Thomas. VK Vanessa Keller? I stared at the message, suspicion warring with curiosity. Why would Thomas's lover reach out to me now? Was it a trap? A peace offering? Or something else entirely? Before I could decide whether to respond, my phone rang. Alex. You saw the board meeting went well, I said by way of greeting. I did, he confirmed. But that's not why I'm calling. Our investigators found something in the Michigan financial records. Something big. My attention sharpened. What is it? The transfers to Nautilus Ventures? They didn't start 3 weeks ago like we thought. They've been happening for over a year, disguised as vendor payments to a shell company that feeds into Nautilus. A year? I echoed, the timeline not making sense. But Thomas only started negotiations with Summit recently. Exactly, Alex said grimly. Whatever's happening with the Michigan division predates the Summit deal. And Emma? The total is much larger than we originally thought. Nearly $20 million. The sum was staggering. That's not executive compensation or even a reasonable bribe. That's systematic fraud. There's more, Alex continued. The signature authorizing the original setup of these transfers? It wasn't Thomas's. My breath caught. Whose was it? Catherine Reynolds. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Catherine had been siphoning money from Reynolds Enterprises for over a year? But why? The Reynolds family was wealthy by any standard, even with the company's recent struggles. Keep digging, I instructed. Alex. I want to know where that money went and why. And Alex, let's keep this between us for now. Not even Sophia or William. Understood, he agreed. What's your next move? I glanced again at the text from Vanessa Keller. I think I'm about to have coffee with the enemy. Vanessa had suggested meeting at a small cafe in Cambridge, neutral territory far from the financial district where we might be recognized. I arrived early, selecting a table in the back corner with a clear view of the door and all exits, a habit from my Morgan Capital days that now seemed particularly prudent. She arrived exactly on time, looking nothing like the polished executive from the surveillance photos. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her designer suit replaced by jeans and a sweater, as if she was deliberately trying to avoid attention. Ms. Morgan, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I'm curious what you think we have to discuss, I replied coolly. Given the circumstances. Vanessa's expression remained carefully neutral. I understand your hostility, but I'm not here about my relationship with Thomas. Then why are you here? She glanced around cautiously before leaning forward. Because Summit Partners is being used, just like Reynolds Enterprises. And I think you're the only person who can stop it. Her statement caught me off guard. Used how? The Reynolds acquisition was never about manufacturing or patents, Vanessa explained in a low voice. It was about the Michigan property. The land? I asked, confused. The Michigan facility included several hundred acres of industrial property, but it was hardly prime real estate. What's under it? Vanessa clarified. Preliminary surveys indicate significant rare earth mineral deposits. Minerals essential for semiconductor manufacturing, battery technology, defense applications. I tried to process this information. And Summit knows this? Vanessa shook her head. Only the executive team directly involved in the acquisition. Richard Hayes, myself, 2 others. The plan was to acquire Reynolds cheaply, discover the deposits during environmental assessments, then sell the rights to a mining consortium for billions. And Thomas? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Was he part of this plan? Thomas was... Vanessa hesitated, something like regret flashing across her face. Useful, but ultimately expendable. The clinical assessment stung even though it shouldn't have. I had no reason to care how Summit Partners viewed my ex-fiancé. Why are you telling me this? I pressed. Aren't you implicating yourself in what sounds like securities fraud at minimum? Because it's gone too far, Vanessa said, genuine distress breaking through her composed exterior. People are getting hurt, not just financially. What do you mean, hurt? She pulled out her phone, bringing up an article from a local Michigan newspaper. James Peterson, the Reynolds division head in Michigan, he died in a car accident last night, after telling Thomas he wanted out of whatever they were planning. I stared at the article, a chill running through me. Peterson had been uncooperative during our audit, but I'd attributed that to loyalty to Thomas. If he'd died under suspicious circumstances? Are you suggesting Thomas had something to do with this? I asked, the idea almost too horrific to contemplate. Not Thomas, Vanessa said, her voice dropping further. Catherine, she's the one running this operation, has been from the beginning. The revelation aligned with what Alex had just discovered about Catherine's signature on the fraudulent transfers. Still, I was skeptical. Why would Catherine Reynolds risk her family's company, their reputation for this? They're already wealthy. Not as wealthy as they appear, Vanessa countered. William's medical treatments have drained their personal finances, and there are other expenses, debts that need to be paid. What kind of debts? Vanessa hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. The kind you incur when you borrow from the wrong people. Catherine got involved with some investors several years ago. Private money, untraceable. The kind that doesn't forgive late payments. The picture was becoming clearer, though no less disturbing. And the Summit acquisition was her way out? A massive cash infusion that would solve her problems? Exactly, Vanessa confirmed. The $10 million signing bonus for Thomas? That was going straight to Catherine's creditors. The equity stake he was so proud of would have been transferred to offshore accounts within days of the deal closing. And Thomas didn't know any of this? I asked, finding it hard to believe. He could be so oblivious. Thomas knows some of it, Vanessa admitted. He knows his mother needed money. He knows the Summit deal would provide it. But the rest, the mineral rights, the dangerous creditors, Peterson's accident, I don't think so. Thomas is ambitious and morally flexible, but he's not. She trailed off. A killer? I supplied. Vanessa nodded, looking genuinely troubled. I got in too deep before I realized what was really happening. When I tried to back away, Catherine made it clear that wasn't an option. She threatened you? Not explicitly. But the message was clear. Vanessa's composure cracked further. I'm scared, Ms. Morgan, and I think you should be too. Catherine Reynolds isn't going to let you take control of Reynolds Enterprises without a fight. A real fight. I studied her, looking for signs of deception. Why come to me with this? Why not go to the authorities? With what evidence? Everything I've told you is circumstantial at best, and Catherine has connections, political, legal. Going public would be suicide, literally in my case. She had a point, much as I hated to admit it. So what do you expect me to do with this information? Use it, Vanessa said simply. You have resources I don't. Access to Reynolds records. The authority to investigate properly. Find concrete evidence of what Catherine's doing before she destroys more lives, including yours. As Vanessa left the cafe, her warning echoing in my mind, I found myself facing a harsh truth. I had believed Thomas was my greatest threat, but the real danger had been lurking in the shadows all along. Catherine Reynolds wasn't just fighting to protect her son or her family's legacy. She was fighting for survival, and people like that were capable of anything. I stared at the mineral survey report spread across my hotel suite's dining table, the technical language swimming before my tired eyes. After my meeting with Vanessa, I'd immediately tasked Alex with pulling every piece of data we had on the Michigan facility: property assessments, environmental studies, geological surveys. If Catherine Reynolds was willing to destroy her family's company and possibly arrange a murder for what lay beneath that land, I needed to know exactly what we were dealing with. The preliminary findings are consistent with Vanessa's claim, Alex said, highlighting sections of the most recent environmental assessment. Traces of neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, all rare earth elements crucial for high-tech manufacturing, and easily worth billions if the deposits are substantial, I concluded, rubbing my temples. Has anyone at Reynolds commissioned a formal mineral rights survey? Not that we can find, Alex replied. But there was an unusual consulting contract, signed about 18 months ago with a company called Geospectra Technologies. They specialize in remote sensing for mineral exploration. Off the books, I murmured. Catherine wouldn't want any official record that might attract attention. Exactly. And guess who approved that contract? Alex flipped to a signature page. James Peterson, I read aloud, the name of the recently deceased Michigan division head, sending a chill through me. The timing fits. Catherine identifies the potential mineral deposits, brings Peterson in on the scheme, then sets up the offshore accounts to funnel money. And when Peterson got cold feet, Alex left the implication. Hanging. We need proof, I said firmly. Speculation about Catherine's involvement in Peterson's death won't help us. Focus on the financial angle. That's where we'll find our leverage. Already on it. Our forensic accountants are tracing every dollar that went through Nautilus Ventures. Alex hesitated. Emma, if Catherine really is behind this, and if she's as dangerous as Vanessa suggests, maybe you should consider stepping back. Let law enforcement handle it. I shook my head. Not yet. Without solid evidence, it would be our word against hers, and the Reynolds name still carries significant weight in Boston. Besides, if Catherine's creditors are as dangerous as Vanessa, implied, involving authorities could accelerate the timeline of whatever she's planning. So what's our next move? I stood, moving to the window that overlooked Boston Harbor. We need access to Catherine's personal records, bank statements, phone logs, emails, anything that might connect her to Peterson's death or the mineral rights scheme. That won't be easy, Alex warned. Catherine's been meticulous about covering her tracks so far. Then we'll need to be more creative, I decided. First, I want round-the-clock security for William. If Catherine is eliminating obstacles, he could be next. Already arranged. 2 of our best people are with him at all times. Good. Next, let's reach out to Geospectra Technologies. Offer them a consulting contract with Morgan Capital. Something legitimate but similar to whatever Catherine hired them for. See if they'll share information about their previous work in Michigan. Alex made notes. And Thomas? He's been surprisingly quiet since the board meeting. Let's find out where he stands in all this, I said. If he's just Catherine's pawn, he might be valuable as an ally, or at least as a source of information. You think he'd turn against his own mother? I considered this. If he believes she's manipulating him? Maybe. Thomas's ego won't tolerate being anyone's puppet for long. As Alex left to implement our plan, my phone rang with a number I hadn't expected to see. William Reynolds. William, I answered. Is everything all right? As well as can be expected, he replied, his voice weaker than when I'd seen him that morning. I wanted to thank you for handling the board meeting so effectively. It was necessary, I said carefully, unsure how much to share about my suspicions regarding Catherine. Yes, but not easy. Exposing Thomas that way. He paused. It couldn't have been pleasant for you, given your history. An understatement of magnificent proportions. Some truths need to be faced, painful as they may be. Speaking of truths, William continued, Catherine came to see me after the meeting. She was quite upset. My grip tightened on the phone. I imagine she would be. She's demanding we reconsider the restructuring plan. Claims you manipulated the board with false information about Thomas. And what did you tell her? That the decision was final, William said firmly. But Emma, she mentioned something concerning. Said if I didn't intervene, certain financial arrangements would come to light. Arrangements that could damage the Reynolds name permanently. My pulse quickened. Did she elaborate? No. Claimed it was to protect me. That I didn't need to know the details. William's voice hardened slightly. I've been married to Catherine for 40 years. I know when she's hiding something significant. I weighed my options carefully. William was already dealing with terminal cancer and his son's betrayal. Did he need to know his wife might be involved in financial fraud and possibly murder? William, I said slowly, we're investigating some irregularities in the Michigan Division's finances. Transfers authorized by Catherine that didn't go through proper channels. How irregular? He asked, instantly alert despite his illness. Potentially. Very. We're still gathering information. I hesitated. Have you heard of Nautilus Ventures? A pause. No. Should I have? It's an offshore company receiving funds from Reynolds Enterprises, significant funds. William was silent for a long moment. You believe Catherine is embezzling from the company? I believe she's using company resources for something unauthorized, I hedged. Whether it's technically embezzlement depends on the intent and the ultimate destination of those funds. And the Michigan Division specifically? William pressed. Why there? I hadn't planned to tell William about the mineral rights yet, but his insight into the Michigan operations could be valuable. There may be valuable resources on that property that haven't been officially disclosed. The rare earth deposits, William said immediately, surprising me. You know about those? Now it was my turn to be silent in shock. You knew about potential mineral deposits under the Michigan facility? Of course, William replied, as if it were obvious. I commissioned the initial surveys myself about 5 years ago. The results were promising, but not conclusive enough to justify the massive investment needed for extraction. I shelved the project when I got my diagnosis. This changed everything. If William already knew about the deposits, what exactly was Catherine hiding? And why go to such elaborate lengths to funnel money through offshore accounts? William, who else knew about these survey results? Just me, Catherine, and our chief legal counsel at the time. We agreed to keep it confidential until we could determine whether extraction would be economically feasible. And Thomas? Did he know? No, William said firmly. I saw no need to burden him with speculative information. It was a potential future opportunity, nothing more. I processed this new information quickly. William, I need to see those original surveys and any other data you have on the Michigan property. They should be in my private files at the main office. I'll have Sophia help you access them. After hanging up with William, I immediately called Alex to update him on this unexpected development. If William already knew about the deposits, that complicates our theory, Alex acknowledged. But it doesn't explain the money transfers or Peterson's death. No, it doesn't, I agreed. In fact, it makes Catherine's secret operations even more suspicious. Why hide something William already knew about? Unless what she's hiding isn't the existence of the deposits, but what she plans to do with them, Alex suggested. Or who she's working with, I added, a new possibility forming in my mind. Vanessa mentioned dangerous creditors. What if Catherine promised them the mineral rights in exchange for something else? Like what? I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. I checked my watch. I'm heading to the Reynolds main office to look at William's files. Have security meet me there. The Reynolds Enterprises headquarters occupied a stately brick building overlooking Boston Common, its classic architecture projecting stability and tradition. As my car pulled up to the entrance, I noted with satisfaction that the press contingent that had been camped outside for days had dwindled to just a few determined reporters. Sophia met me in the lobby, her expression grim. William called ahead. His private files are in the executive storage room. I've had them pulled and moved to the conference room for your review. Thank you. Any sign of Thomas or Catherine? Thomas cleared out his office this morning. Didn't say much, just took a few personal items and left. Sophia lowered her voice. Catherine, on the other hand, has been in and out all day. She's currently in a meeting with the company's outside counsel on the 14th floor. Keep an eye on that meeting, I instructed. Let me know when it concludes. In the conference room, several boxes of files awaited my attention. Williams' organizational system was old school, paper documents meticulously labeled and filed chronologically. I located the Michigan property assessments quickly, pulling out the folder marked Mineral Survey, Confidential. The reports inside confirmed Williams' account. Initial surveys conducted 5 years ago had indicated potential rare earth deposits, but with a high extraction cost that made immediate development impractical. William had noted in the margins, revisit in 10 years when technology improves. Sensible, forward-thinking approach. So why had Catherine suddenly accelerated the timeline? What had changed? I continued searching through the files, looking for any clue that might explain Catherine's urgency and willingness to take extreme risks. In a folder labeled Personal KR, I found something unexpected: medical records. Catherine had been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer 3 years ago. She'd undergone successful treatment at a private clinic in Switzerland, with all expenses paid personally rather than through insurance. The cost was staggering. Over $2 million for cutting-edge therapies not available in the U.S. This explained the drain on the Reynolds' personal finances that Vanessa had mentioned, but not Catherine's subsequent actions. Many wealthy families faced substantial medical bills without resorting to fraud. Deeper in the files, I found records of large transfers from the Reynolds' personal accounts to an entity called Brighton Holdings. The payments began shortly after Catherine's treatment concluded and continued monthly for almost 2 years, totaling nearly $15 million. Sophia, I called, do we have any information on Brighton Holdings in our corporate database? Ian checked the system. Nothing in our records. It's not a vendor or partner of Reynolds Enterprises. Can you run a broader search? Public records, news mentions, anything? While Sophia worked on that, I continued examining William's files. In a folder marked Family Trust, I found correspondence between William and his estate attorney discussing the Reynolds family holdings, not just their shares in Reynolds Enterprises, but extensive real estate investments, art collections, and offshore accounts. One document caught my attention, a trust amendment dated 18 months ago that removed Catherine as a trustee and beneficiary of certain assets. William had effectively limited her access to significant portions of the family fortune without her knowledge, based on a handwritten note attached to the document. Why would William take such a drastic step against his wife of 40 years? Had he discovered something about Catherine's activities? "Emma," Sophia called from the doorway, her expression troubled. "I found Brighton Holdings. It's a private investment firm based in Zurich, but there's very little public information available." "What did you find?" "Just one news article from the Financial Times 3 years ago. Brighton was mentioned in connection with an investigation into money laundering for certain Eastern European clients. The investigation was dropped suddenly, with no explanation." The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a disturbing picture. Catherine had sought expensive treatment in Switzerland, possibly becoming entangled with questionable financial entities while there. The timing aligned with the beginning of her payments to Brighton Holdings. "Sophia, do we have phone records for Catherine's office line?" "Yes, standard business records going back 7 years. Pull everything from 3 years ago, focusing on international calls to Switzerland." While Sophia retrieved the records, my phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Geospectra agreed to meet. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Also, Thomas just checked into the Charles Titers Night Hotel under an assumed name. Meeting someone in the bar in 30 minutes. I quickly replied, "Who's he meeting?" Alex's response was immediate. Richard Hayes from Summit Partners. So Thomas was still pursuing the deal, despite being removed from the company. Or perhaps he was seeking an explanation for Summit's manipulations. Either way, I needed to know what was discussed. "Have someone monitor the meeting discreetly?" I instructed. "We need details." Sophia returned with Catherine's phone records, which confirmed my suspicions. In the weeks surrounding her treatment in Switzerland, Catherine had made dozens of calls to numbers in Zurich, including several to a line associated with Brighton Holdings. "Emma?" Sophia said hesitantly. "What exactly are we looking for here? This feels personal." I understood her discomfort. We were digging into Catherine's medical history and private communications, far beyond standard business investigations. "We're looking for the truth," I said simply. "Catherine has been operating behind the scenes, moving company funds through offshore accounts. I need to understand why." Sophia nodded, though she still looked troubled. "There's something else you should know. When I was accessing William's private files, I noticed some had been viewed recently. Electronic access logs show Catherine accessed the mineral survey files last week. This was significant." "Was this before or after the board vote on Thomas's restructuring plan?" "Before. 2 days before." So Catherine had reviewed the mineral survey right before the board approved Thomas's plan to sell to Summit. The plan that would have given Summit control of the Michigan property and, by extension, the mineral rights. "Sophia, do we have visitor logs for the executive floor?" "Of course. Standard security protocol. Check if Catherine had any unusual visitors in the past month. Anyone not directly connected to Reynolds' business." While Sophia checked the logs, I reviewed what we knew. Catherine had undergone expensive medical treatment in Switzerland 3 years ago. She subsequently began making large payments to Brighton Holdings, a shadowy investment firm with possible connections to money laundering. William had limited Catherine's access to family assets without her knowledge. Catherine had accessed the mineral survey files just before the board vote that would have sold the company to Summit. Money had been flowing from the Michigan division to offshore accounts controlled by Catherine. James Peterson, who managed the Michigan division, had died under suspicious circumstances after telling Thomas he wanted out. The picture was becoming clearer, but the central question remained. What was Catherine's endgame? Was she simply trying to pay off debts to Brighton Holdings? Or was there something more sinister at play? "Found something," Sophia announced. 3 weeks ago, Catherine had a meeting with a Viktor Petrov. No company affiliation listed. The name meant nothing to me. "Run a background check. Full profile. Already did, Sophia said, handing me a printout. He's a Russian businessman with mining interests in Siberia, specialized in rare earth extraction. Now we were getting somewhere. Catherine had met with a Russian mining executive right before setting Thomas's plan in motion. Is there any record of communication between Thomas and Petrov? I asked. Sophia shook her head. Nothing in our systems. If they've communicated, it wasn't through company channels, which suggested Thomas might not know about Petrov at all. Was he truly just a pawn in Catherine's game, as Vanessa had suggested? My phone rang. Alex again. The meeting between Thomas and Hayes just ended, he reported. It was heated. Thomas accused Hayes of using him to get access to the Michigan property. Hayes denied knowing anything about mineral deposits. How did Thomas react? He threw a drink in Hayes' face and stormed out. Our guy says Thomas looked genuinely shocked and angry. So Thomas hadn't known about the mineral deposits or Summit's true interest in the property. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Where did Thomas go after the meeting? He's headed toward Brookline, likely going to his parents' house. Catherine and Thomas in the same location could be volatile or informative. Have someone watch the house. I want to know what happens. As I hung up, Sophia returned with another discovery. I checked Catherine's personal assistant's calendar. Catherine has a flight booked to Zurich tomorrow night. Is William going with her? No. The assistant's notes indicate it's for personal business. One-way ticket. Catherine was planning to flee. The timing couldn't be coincidental, right after Thomas's confrontation with Hayes, right after our investigation had started uncovering her activities. We need to move faster, I decided. Call the forensic accountants. I want a complete trace of every dollar that went through Nautilus Ventures by morning. And contact our security team watching William. Make sure they're on high alert. You. Think Catherine might try to harm William? Sophia asked, alarmed. I think Catherine is desperate and running out of options, I replied. And desperate people are unpredictable. As Sophia left to make the calls, I returned to studying the documents before me, a plan forming in my mind. Catherine had spent years building this scheme, manipulating everyone around her, including her own son. She believed she held all the cards, that she could disappear before facing consequences. She was wrong, and tomorrow I would prove it. But first, I needed to understand exactly what William knew, or suspected, about his wife's activities. Why had he restricted her access to family assets without confronting her directly? What was he protecting besides money? As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone lit up with a text from William. Need to speak with you. Urgently. Not on the phone. Can you come to the house? I hesitated. Going to the Reynolds home meant potentially facing Catherine. But William's message sounded genuinely urgent, and he might have crucial information. On my way, I replied, gathering my things. Whatever Catherine was planning, whatever her connection to Brighton Holdings and Viktor Petrov, William was the missing piece of the puzzle. And I intended to find it before Catherine could make her escape. Night had fallen by the time my car pulled up to the Reynolds estate in Brookline. The sprawling Georgian mansion sat back from the road, partially hidden by ancient oak trees, its windows glowing warmly against the darkness. Despite its inviting appearance, I felt a growing sense of unease as I approached. Wait here, I instructed my security team. I'll text every 15 minutes. If you don't hear from me, come in. The head of my security detail frowned. Ms. Morgan, given what we know about Catherine Reynolds, I strongly advise against going in alone. I appreciate your concern, Michael, but William specifically requested privacy. Besides, I added, patting my purse where I'd stored digital copies of all the evidence we'd gathered. I'm not exactly defenseless. As I rang the doorbell, I saw movement behind one of the front windows, a shadow passing quickly. When the door finally opened, I was surprised to find Thomas standing there, his expression guarded. "Emma," he said flatly, "I should have known you'd be involved in this." "In what, exactly?" I asked, stepping past him into the grand foyer. "My father's urgent family meeting," Thomas replied, closing the door behind me. "He called me an hour. Ego insisted I come immediately. Wouldn't explain why." So I wasn't the only one William had summoned. "Where is he?" "Library. With my mother." Thomas's tone conveyed volumes about the tension in that room. "They've been arguing since I arrived." As if on cue, Catherine's voice echoed down the hallway, sharp, defensive, angry. William's reply was too quiet to make out. Thomas and I exchanged a glance, momentary allies in our mutual concern for William's well-being. Without discussion, we moved toward the library together. The scene inside was tense. William sat rigid in his wheelchair, facial color high despite his illness, while Catherine paced before the fireplace, her elegant composure notably absent. "I had no right to look into my private affairs," she was saying as we entered. "Those transactions were—" She stopped abruptly, seeing us. "What is she doing here?" William turned, relief evident in his expression. "Emma, Thomas, thank you both for coming." "What's going on, Dad?" Thomas asked, his gaze moving suspiciously between his parents. "Why the emergency meeting?" William gestured to the evidence folders spread across his desk. "I've been reviewing certain financial activities that have come to my attention. Activities that threaten everything the Reynolds name stands for." Catherine's laugh was brittle. "Always so dramatic, William. A few personal investments hardly constitute a crisis." $2 million diverted monthly from company accounts is not a personal investment, Catherine," William countered. "Nor is your association with Victor Petrov and Brighton Holdings." Thomas stiffened beside me. "What's he talking about, Mother?" Catherine's eyes narrowed on me. "Ask your ex-fiancée. She seems to have appointed herself the family investigator." "I only followed the evidence," I said evenly. "Evidence that leads directly to you, Catherine. The offshore accounts, the secret meetings with Petrov, James Peterson's convenient accident after he threatened to expose your operation." "Peterson's death was tragic but hardly suspicious," Catherine said dismissively. "And my business dealings are exactly that, my business." "Not when they involve company funds," William interjected. "Not when they involve selling mineral rights that belong to Reynolds Enterprises." Thomas looked increasingly confused. "What mineral rights? What are you talking about?" "The Michigan property sits on significant rare earth deposits," I explained, watching his reaction carefully. "Worth billions with the right extraction technology. Your mother has been negotiating to sell those rights to Victor Petrov, using Summit Partners as an unknowing middleman." Thomas's face drained of color. "That's why Hayes was so interested in the Michigan division. Not for the manufacturing capabilities, at all." "And you played right into it," Catherine said with a dismissive wave. "Setting up the Summit deal, restructuring the company, all according to plan. My plan." "Your plan?" Thomas echoed, his voice hollow. "You used me? Set me up as the public face of a deal that would benefit— Who, exactly? This Petrov person?" "Brighton Holdings," William corrected grimly. "The organization that's had its hooks in your mother for the past 3 years. Catherine's composure slipped further. "They saved my life when conventional medicine couldn't. The treatment in Switzerland was paid for," William interrupted. "In full. The subsequent payments were something else entirely. Protection. Money. Blackmail." "What did they have on you, Catherine?" I asked quietly. For a moment, genuine fear flashed across Catherine's face before she masked it. "Nothing that concerns any of you." "It concerns me," Thomas insisted, anger replacing his initial shock. "You manipulated me into betraying my father, destroying my relationship with Emma, all for some scheme with Russian mining interests?" Don't be naive, Thomas. Business is business. The summit deal would have made you CEO of a restructured company with significant personal wealth. You'd have been set for life. Until Petrov stripped the mineral assets and left the company a hollow shell, I pointed out. Thousands of employees would lose their jobs, communities devastated, the Reynolds legacy destroyed. Collateral damage, Catherine said coldly. Unfortunate but necessary. The callousness of her response visibly shook Thomas. He turned to William, his expression pained. Did you know about this, Dad? That Mother was using me? William shook his head. Not until recently. I knew about the mineral deposits. That was legitimate business research years ago. But Catherine's connections to Brighton Holdings? Her plans to sell to Petrov? I only discovered those when Emma's investigation brought them to light. Which is why you called us all here tonight, I concluded. To confront Catherine directly. Yes, William confirmed. And to inform you both of decisions I've made regarding the future of Reynolds Enterprises. Catherine laughed harshly. Whatever you're planning, it's too late. The arrangements are already made. By this time tomorrow, you'll be on a plane to Zurich, I finished for her. A one-way ticket, according to your assistant's calendar. Running away, Catherine? Her eyes flashed dangerously. Strategic retreat. Something you apparently never learned in your ruthless climb to the top, Emma. William cleared his throat. No one is going to Zurich, Catherine. I've frozen all our personal accounts and informed the FBI about Brighton Holdings' activities. They're particularly interested in their connection to James Peterson's death. The color drained from Catherine's face. You wouldn't dare. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I do, William said grimly. While Emma was investigating the financial angle, I had my own sources looking into Brighton Holdings. They're not just money launderers, Catherine. They're connected to international arms dealing, human trafficking. Did you know that when you got into bed with them? Catherine's composure cracked completely. They approached me in Switzerland, offered innovative cancer treatments when conventional doctors had given me months to live. What was I supposed to do? Tell your husband, William said quietly. Trust your family to help you. The raw pain in his voice silenced the room momentarily. For the first time, I saw the full measure of William's heartbreak, not just over Catherine's financial betrayal, but her fundamental lack of trust in him when it mattered most. It's done now, Catherine said after a moment, her voice steadier. If you've contacted the FBI, I assume you've made arrangements for my arrest? William's expression was a complex mixture of sadness and resolve. Agents are waiting outside, but there's an alternative. Full cooperation. Everything you know about Brighton Holdings, Petrov, all of it. In exchange for witness protection. You expect me to testify against people who wouldn't hesitate to kill for much smaller betrayals? Catherine asked incredulously. I expect you to do the right thing for once, William replied. To think about someone besides yourself. Thomas had been silent, processing the revelations. Now he stepped forward. I'll go with you, Mother. Into witness protection. You won't be alone. The offer clearly surprised Catherine. Why would you do that? After what I've done. Because you're my mother, Thomas said simply. And because I understand what it means to make terrible choices for what seemed like good reasons. His gaze shifted to me, genuine regret in his eyes. I owe you an apology, Emma. I was angry when I found out who you really were, felt manipulated and lied to. It was easier to focus on your deception than to face my own. We both made mistakes, I acknowledged, kept parts of ourselves hidden out of fear. The difference is, your secrets were about protecting yourself, Thomas said. Mine ended up hurting everyone around me. The subtle clearing of a throat from the doorway drew our attention. Michael, the head of my security team, stood there, with two serious-looking men in suits. Ms. Morgan, your check-in is overdue, he said apologetically, and these gentlemen are here for Mrs. Reynolds. Catherine straightened her shoulders, her aristocratic bearing reasserting itself in the face of crisis. I'll need to pack a few things. Everything's been arranged, Mrs. Reynolds, one of the agents said, including necessary personal items. We need to move quickly. She nodded, then turned to William. I did love you, you know. That was never a lie. I know, he said softly. Just as I know the cancer diagnosis was real, even if you used it as leverage later. I wish you had trusted me with the truth from the beginning. Easier to believe in others when you've never been truly desperate, Catherine replied. She turned to Thomas. You don't have to do this. Witness protection isn't a life you're built for. I'm stronger than you think, Thomas said, and I have a lot to make up for. As the agents escorted Catherine away, Thomas following after a final, meaningful glance in my direction, William and I were left alone in the suddenly quiet library. I'm sorry it came to this, I said, taking the seat across from him. As am I, he replied. Though perhaps it's better to face the truth, however painful, than to live with comfortable lies. A philosophy I'd been avoiding for years with my dual identities, I realized. What happens now with Reynolds Enterprises? William smiled faintly. That depends largely on you, Emma. The board has approved the restructuring plan with you as interim CEO. The question is whether you want the position permanently. You know I never intended to run the company, I reminded him. My investment was about saving jobs, preserving the Reynolds legacy. And you've done that, William acknowledged. But you've also proven yourself exactly the kind of leader Reynolds needs going forward. Someone who values integrity over profit, sustainable growth over quick returns. You're not giving yourself enough credit, I pointed out. You built something remarkable, William, something worth saving. And now I'm entrusting it to you to carry forward, he said firmly. The Reynolds Morgan Enterprises we discussed. A fresh start with the best of both our legacies. The offer was tempting in ways I hadn't anticipated. For years, I'd built Morgan Capital in the shadows, my success known only to a select few. Taking the helm of a public company, stepping fully into the light as Emma Morgan, it represented a freedom I'd denied myself for too long. Thomas had chosen wealth over love, not knowing I controlled everything he wanted. The irony wasn't lost on me. But in losing what I thought I wanted, a life with Thomas, the safety of my dual identities, I'd gained something far more valuable. The courage to step fully into my power, to lead with integrity, to live without hiding. As the Michigan facility receded in the distance, I felt not the closure of a chapter, but the beginning of a new one. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them as my complete self. No more masks, no more divisions, just Emma Morgan, finally at peace with who she was and what she was capable of building. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories, ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.